One phone call to the Department of Defense was all it took to end 2 careers and remind the nation that injustice can't always hide behind a badge. It began like 100 other drives Brigadier General Tiana Marshall had made across the South quiet roads, modest towns, and the unspoken rule that certain places still clung to their past. She had no reason to expect anything different that day in Louisiana, just another routine trip from Lake Charles to a high-level briefing at Barksdale Air Force Base. There were no flashing lights, no armored escorts. Just Tiana, a standard rental car, and a tight schedule. Her phony secure, military-issued device flashed low signal as she drove past the whispering pine forests lining the road outside a little town called Brookhaven. Tiana glanced at the screen and frowned. The call she needed to make wasn't optional, and it sure couldn't wait until she reached base. She spotted a half-abandoned gas station with a flickering neon sign that read Jerry's Pit Stop and turned into its uneven, weed-cracked lot. It wasn't much to rusted pumps, a warped awning, and a sun-baked convenience store that looked like it hadn't seen new paint since the 1980s, but it had just enough cell coverage to get the job done. She parked off to the side, away from the small cluster of locals hanging out front with beers in hand and small-town boredom in their eyes. Wearing faded jeans, a green utility jacket, sneakers, and a ball cap pulled low over her short, coiled hair, Tiana didn't look like someone important. And that was the point. She didn't need a spectacle, she needed clarity, connection, and 5 minutes of privacy. She stepped out, phone in hand, and began the classified call with the Pentagon. General Marshall, confirming identity. Requesting update on secure movement, she said quietly. The voice on the other end was crisp, launching immediately into a stream of highly sensitive information intel on troop relocations, alerts from surveillance assets, and directives that only a small circle of national leaders were clear to hear. Tiana listened carefully, scanning the lot now and then, as instinct and training had taught her. Inside the station, behind a yellowing plastic counter and a cloud of suspicion, watched Geraldine Jerry Mathers, the store owner. A widow in her early 60s with sharp eyes and a tighter mouth, she had lived in Brookhaven all her life and didn't care much for unfamiliar faces, especially black ones who looked too focused, too composed, too different. She didn't see a high-ranking officer executing orders from Washington. She didn't even see a woman making a phone call. All she saw was what she chose to see, a problem. Without hesitation, Jerry picked up the ancient rotary phone behind the counter and called the Brookhaven Police Department. "Yeah, I've got a woman loitering out here by the pumps," she whispered. "Doesn't look right. Could be on something. Talking to herself. Might want to check it out." She hung up before dispatch could ask for details. Just a few miles away, officers Paul Kendrick and Scott Nally heard the call come through their cruiser radio. Paul, a husky man with a Marine buzz cut, had spent most of his 10 years on the force waiting for a moment to prove he was more than just a local cop. Scott, younger and wired with nerves, looked up to Paul and tried too hard to act like him. The two exchanged a look. "About time we got something," Paul muttered as he flipped on the lights and peeled out. Tiana was still deep in the briefing when the first flash of red and blue cut through the dusty windows of Jerry's station. She turned her head slightly, but kept listening, hoping it had nothing to do with her. When the cruiser skidded into the lot and 2 officers jumped out before the vehicle had even stopped, she knew better. She placed the phone gently on the hood of her car, kept her hands in plain sight, and stood straight the way she'd been taught at the academy decades earlier. Calm, in control, professional. "Afternoon, officers," she said evenly. "Can I help you?" "License and registration," Kendrick snapped. "Now." "Sure thing," she replied, slowly reaching for her wallet. "I'm on official orders. I'm General Tiana Marshall, U.S. Army. I have credentials and—" "General, huh?" Nally interrupted with a chuckle. "You expect us to believe that?" She extended her military ID and travel documents. Kendrick snatched them from her hand, barely glancing before tossing them onto her hood. "Fake," he barked. Tiana blinked, caught off guard not by the accusation, but by the certainty in his tone. "Sir," she began, but Nally cut her off. "Shut it. You think you can play us? In this town? You messed with the wrong guys. Locals started drifting closer. Some leaned against their trucks, others pulled out phones. No one spoke up. No one intervened. Tiana could see the trap closing in. She tried once more. Call your supervisor. I'm telling you, this is a federal issue. But Kendrick had already drawn his handcuffs. Turn around, he ordered. Now. Tiana didn't move. You're making a huge mistake, she said, her voice steady. Yeah. Kendrick grinned. And I'm Elvis. Without warning, Nally grabbed her left arm, twisting hard. Kendrick followed with the right. The cuffs clicked shut. Too tight. Deliberate. She clenched her jaw as the humiliation surged, swallowing it like shrapnel. Behind her, the Pentagon line went silent. Inside the Department of Defense's command center in D.C., Lieutenant Commander Rohin Singh stared at the screen, flashing connection lost. The live call had descended into chaos, shouts, scuffling, static. Then silence. Get her location, ordered his superior, Colonel Denise Carver. A map appeared within seconds. Tiana's signal was pinned at a gas station off Highway 165. Get Barksdale on the line. Now, Carver snapped. And notify military legal. Meanwhile, back in Brookhaven, Tiana sat handcuffed on the hot pavement, back against the grimy station wall. Nally stood over her, arms crossed. Who are you really? He demanded. Tia. Cartel? What's the game here? You have everything you need, she replied calmly. You just refuse to see it. You're real close to being booked for obstruction, Kendrick growled. She said nothing. The crowd was larger now. Phones were out. Whispered comments floated around her like smoke. Then Nally's radio crackled. Dispatch to Unit 12. Subject flagged. Federal alert active. Pentagon engaged. Release immediately. Stand by for further instruction. Kendrick froze. Nally's jaw went slack. You've got to be kidding, he mumbled. Neither of them met her gaze as Kendrick fumbled the keys and uncuffed her. Ma'am, he muttered, barely audible. Tiana rose slowly, flexing her wrists. Her phone lay face down on the ground, the screen spiderwebbed. Her connection to D.C. severed. She picked it up, looked each officer dead in the eye, and said, This isn't over. Not even close. Before either of them could respond, a convoy of black SUVs screeched into the lot. Men in uniform poured out with precision. Lieutenant Colonel Eric Maddox, lean, serious, and all business, led the charge. General Marshal, are you harmed? He asked. Only my pride, she replied. Maddox turned to the Brookhaven officers. You are hereby ordered to cease and desist pending federal investigation. Any further action may be deemed obstruction of justice. Kendrick tried to speak. Maddox cut him off. You were shown credentials. You chose ignorance. Nally attempted a weak defense. She was acting shady. Maddox stared him down. You saw a black woman on a phone and decided that was criminal. That will follow you forever. The Barksdale team surrounded Tiana and ushered her into the lead SUV. As they pulled away, she looked back once. Jerry ducked inside the store. Kendrick wiped his forehead with a shaky hand, and the crowd silent now watched the caravan disappear. At Barksdale, a whirlwind of reports, legal briefings, and damage control followed. Civil rights attorneys flew in. The Department of Justice opened an inquiry. Pentagon officials convened crisis meetings. The video shaky cell footage of Tiana being handcuffed while calmly identifying herself hit the internet. It exploded. Within hours, Brookhaven was national news. Chief Earl Douglas held a disastrous press conference. We regret the confusion, he mumbled, sweating under hot lights. We're investigating. A local reporter asked, Is this the first time these officers failed to recognize federal authority, or just the first time they got caught? Douglas had no answer. It didn't stop there. Prior complaints against Kendrick and Nally surfaced use of force, profiling, conduct unbecoming. The floodgates opened. Meanwhile, Tiana remained composed. She gave statements. She met with legal counsel. But in private, the weight settled in her chest like a stone. After everything decades of service, 3 tours, awards, and sacrifice, none of it shielded her from a roadside takedown. She wasn't new to battles. She just never expected one like this on her own soil, in plain clothes. So she fought. She stepped to the podium outside Barksdale, medals pinned, hat tucked under her arm. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned in. "My name is General Tiana Marshall," she said. "I've served for nearly 30 years. Yesterday, I was judged not by my experience, but by my appearance. Not by my credentials, but by my complexion." She paused. "This isn't just about me. This is about every person who has ever been dismissed, disrespected, or detained because someone else refused to see their worth." There was no anger in her voice, only steel. "I'm not asking for an apology. I am demanding accountability." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Veterans nodded. Community members cheered. Civil rights leaders called it a turning point. "I was not the one humiliated in Brookhaven," she said. "They were, and history will remember it." As Tiana walked away, slow and steady, the applause followed. But her steps were already moving toward the next fight, not for her dignity, but for justice that others hadn't yet received. The road was long, but Tiana Marshall had never been one to retreat.